Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tea Time with Dr. Chan. Today, we are delighted to have Allison Tsay to talk about food allergy. Hi, Allison. How are you?
I'm great. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you for joining us. Could you tell us about yourself, just a brief self introduction?
Absolutely. I'm Allison Tsay. I'm originally from Missouri and went to school in Cambridge, Massachusetts at Harvard University, studied electrical engineering. And now I'm currently working as an engineer in the aerospace industry. And outside of food allergy advocacy, I love to dance. I love to go on runs. I love anything related to planes, aviation, and dogs.
Great, great. So, could you tell us about what are you allergic to and what are your symptoms?
So I manage many food allergies, around 14 to 15, ever since I was born. And those allergies include the top 9 food allergies. So that's peanuts, tree nuts, dairy, eggs, soy, shellfish, gluten, um, sesame, and a few others. But again, it's really hard to sometimes recall those, at will because there's so many. And one thing to note is that my peanut allergy is life-threatening and airborne, which means that um, if I were ever in a situation where there were free-floating peanut particles, or I accidentally ingested something, that would cause a very serious allergic reaction, throat swelling, etc.
That sounds very scary. What is your top scariest moment?
Yeah, I've been fortunate enough that I try to be as safe as possible. And even when you're trying to be as safe and cautious as possible, there are still ways that that things can still happen. So, for example, my most recent accident was I went to Starbucks when I was a college student, and I felt like a matcha latte, and I asked for coconut milk, and I told the barista that I was allergic to dairy. And that wanted coconut milk as a replacement, but somehow there must have been a miscommunication, or the barista simply forgot. And I took one sip of the drink and immediately felt my throat start closing up. And it was really scary. I was supposed to go to a show that day and ended up ditching that show and going to the emergency room instead. And luckily, I was with someone that was able to help me walk to the hospital, which was literally within blocks. But it was very scary and frustrating because I had done everything on my part to make sure that the drink was safe for me. And to this day, Starbucks denies any responsibility for what happened. So it was a very frustrating experience, but you learn from it, and just learn that you have, as someone with food allergies, you have to be vigilant and the best advocate for yourself.
I see. I see. So how have your food allergies affect you upbringing, and how do you cope with your food allergies?
Yeah, so because I was born with the food allergies, um, it's been a constant in my life. It's a chronic condition. It's considered an invisible disability. So the people who have the allergies, you don't necessarily see that, on the outside. And I don't remember growing up between the ages of 1 and 4. You know, I was lucky enough that my family is really supportive. They always cooked delicious meals, and I never realized that I was different when it came to what foods I could eat until I started kindergarten. And it happened to be someone's birthday in late August, and they brought in these delicious looking brownies and cookies for their birthday. And the teacher took one look at the ingredients and realized that some of them contained peanuts and that I couldn't have them. And so that was my first experience feeling that I was different. And it was pretty sad as a 5-year-old not having any equally attractive alternatives. I didn't have my own treats that I could have. But then from there on out, my mom and dad, they provided a treat box with a lot of my favorite treats that were appealing and attractive and delicious. And so whenever someone brought in treats for their birthday, I would be able to partake in a different way. And that continued throughout school. So what's interesting about food allergies, it's not only a health condition, but it does impact every aspect of someone else's life, especially socially and culturally, because food is so tightly coupled with social events, with cultural traditions. And so in elementary school, because of my life threatening peanut allergy, the nurse and my physician thought it would be best if I sat at a separate table during lunch because peanut butter jelly sandwiches are very common on the school menu and a lot of kids like to eat them. And there was no way for the school to ensure that I wouldn't accidentally come in contact with peanut butter. And so the best solution was for me to sit at a separate table. And I remember I could only invite maybe 2 to 3 other people to sit with me. And at one point, it was really hurtful because I had a really good childhood friend, but she loved peanut butter and she didn't want to eat with me at lunch anymore because she missed the taste of peanut butter so much. So I think from a young age, a lot of, if you have food allergies like me, you learn to deal with these interpersonal health, social challenges from a very young age. And then another memory that I had was I loved soccer growing up. And I went to the soccer game with a friend and I was so excited. It was my first soccer game that I'd ever attended. And I didn't realize that there would be open peanuts everywhere. And as I mentioned before, peanut allergies can be really different because the nature of the peanuts and the peanut particles, if it's raw peanuts, it permeates in the open air very easily. And so I remember starting to feel terrible within 5 to 10 minutes of the people around me eating peanuts. I had a rash and we had to leave early. I was upset about that. But yeah, there was not a lot that could have been done except to remove me from that situation. Um, yeah, moving on throughout elementary school, middle school, high school, you just learn as a child to deal with it, to manage by planning ahead of time with the help of parents, obviously bringing my own lunch, making sure that whenever I went to birthday parties, either the parents were aware of my food allergies and knew how to handle that, or that I always had my own food and that I was safe, and that I also always carried my EpiPen in the case of an emergency. Moving on to college, that's a completely different beast when it comes to food allergies. I'm on my own for the first time, and a really big it was my food allergies were a really big factor in my decision in terms of where I went to college. I remember asking some colleges about food allergies, and they didn't really have the infrastructure in place to support students with food allergies. And I was fortunate enough that Harvard was very accommodating. I set up a meeting with the accessibility office, and they said, no problem, the dining halls, the chefs will work with you to make sure that you have your specially planned meals that are prepared separately from everyone else's. And so I felt very taken care of in that regard. But outside of the walls of campus, outside of campus grounds, um, eating out, and especially in a social setting, is such a big part of college. And so having to navigate that on my own for the first time was a big learning curve. But I also learned a lot about myself. As someone with food allergies, I often had to be the planner of social events. So um, if obviously if someone wants to go to Five Guys where they serve open peanuts, um, I would immediately be excluded because of my food allergies. But if I were organizing the event, I can be, the initiator and driving all the decisions. And in that way, I can still spend time with friends without having to sacrifice any kind of safety. But even in college, there were situations that came up. For example, my sorority had a really fun dinner event, and they neglected to mention that they were going to serve pad thai, which is a Thai, yeah, a Thai dish that has a lot of peanuts sprinkled on top. A lot of people love it, but I got to the sorority house and I was immediately hit with that smell. And I couldn't breathe, so I had to leave immediately. And just serves to show how important it is for people who are planning events to be inclusive and think about, who's attending the event, if anyone has dietary restrictions, and how they can do their best to make sure that everyone can enjoy and have a good time. Yeah, that leads me to post-college life. So I started working full-time about a year ago, and for the first time, cooking for myself, that is liberating in many ways. I didn't have to send in my meal orders on a nightly basis to the dining hall anymore. I had more choice in terms of what I bought for groceries. So I think that in a lot of ways is very liberating. And what's liberating for a lot of people with food allergies is having a kitchen and groceries that they have full control over in terms of cross contamination and what goes in their food. But on the other hand, a lot of work events outside of work are food centric, especially in LA, where I was for about a year. And I remember I had a new group of friends. I went out to eat with them once in Koreatown. And the experience of, I guess, watching me order food with all the different food allergies and the restaurant not really being able to accommodate that well, they felt really bad. But then from there on out, instead of trying to find ways to be inclusive and ask me perhaps if there were restaurants that were safe for me, they decided to go out to eat on their own without thinking about perhaps how they could include someone with food allergies. So yeah, that was disappointing. But again, I learned again from college that you just have to be the initiator of social events. And if you're making the decisions, you can be the best advocate for yourself. And then, other aspects that food allergies touch is dating. So obviously with a life-threatening peanut allergy, you can't kiss someone without asking what they've eaten in the past 24 to 48 hours. And that can lead to a very awkward conversation if, if you don't, when you don't know them that well, you don't even know their parents yet. So yeah, it can bring up a lot of interesting conversations and topics. But again, I think, yeah, it's just one of the joys and also the obstacles of living with life-threatening food allergies. And finally, another aspect is travel. So you would think that someone with over 10 food allergies, it would be hard to travel, but it really is manageable, again, if you do the planning and the research ahead of time. So for example, I've traveled to Europe and Asia, and I think the key is to have, again, a kitchen is liberating for people with food allergies. But then on the other hand, there are a lot of aspects of travel that are just beyond your control. Raw peanuts are a really common snack served on airlines, and sometimes airlines are not willing to make an announcement on behalf of someone with an airborne peanut allergy. Sometimes the flight attendants are apathetic, and then sometimes, you know, for example, I remember my parents, whenever we would travel when I was young, they would prepare ahead of time alternative snacks for people sitting in our row and the rows in front of us and behind us, just to give them alternatives and ask them kindly to not eat peanuts if they can, just because of my food allergy. And some people just, for whatever reason, they didn't didn't feel like they just wanted to eat peanuts. And sometimes you can't control what other people do, and that can be frustrating. So yeah, that's a little bit about how allergies can permeate almost every aspect of life outside of just your health.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all your experience and that that really that provide a lot of great context for people who want to work with children or individual with food allergies. So, what is the most important thing that everyone should know about food allergy?
Yeah. So the first thing, I think that number one is that the food allergy is technically classified as a disability under the American Disabilities Act. And so for anyone that has a food allergy, I think it's especially important to know your rights, be an advocate for yourself, and especially when you go to college, work with the accessibility office to make sure that you have equal kind of accessibility to nutritious foods, because college is really hard. And adding food, just insecurity about food and not knowing if food is safe for you, that's just something that you don't want to have to worry about. Second of all, food allergies are difficult, but it's manageable with planning and a lot of patience. So some tools that I have in my toolbox are chef cards. So it's just a simple paper card that's laminated that I hand to waitresses and waiters at restaurants to hand to the chef. It delineates all of my allergies, the severity, examples of dishes that I can eat. So it just facilitates the process of ordering. makes that a lot easier on both myself and the people that are working at the restaurant. And again, planning and being, the initiator and the planner of social events can be something really liberating. And then advice for people who don't have food allergies. I encourage you to think about next time you plan a social event, obviously when it's acceptable to be close to people again, think about ways that you can be inclusive about food. So, do you ask your guests ahead of time if anyone has dietary restrictions? And I'm not asking people to cook something without the top 9 allergens, but just to be aware, if someone has an airborne peanut allergy, perhaps ask your guests to refrain from bringing those dishes, perhaps, provide a gluten-free, dairy-free option. And it's really something that I think is really important for food allergies is that a lot of times in the narrative, we see food allergies as being really restrictive, but I think we can shift away from that restrictive mindset to how allergies and being forced to cook without dairy or gluten and nuts can really foster creativity and open new domains of cooking and cuisine and encourage people to explore. Lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about my food allergy advocacy that I do outside of work. So currently, I serve on the board of the Food Equality Initiative, and the mission of this nonprofit is to level the playing field for families that don't have the means to necessarily afford food that is free from the top allergens. So, for context, when we think about grocery shopping, the average gallon of milk costs $3 to $4. But if you want a milk alternative, that can cost $6 to $8. So that's 2 times to 3 times more than the normal counterpart. And so that kind of financial burden can be really difficult for people who don't have the stability. And on top of that, they also have children with food allergies. And the only way to treat food allergies is to avoid that food. And so a lot of families, the families that FEI is trying to help is to give them access to those foods because no one should really have to choose between buying almond milk for their child or paying an electric bill. So again, thanks everyone for listening to my story, and I hope that after this talk, you're able to go out into the world and think about food inclusivity and how people with dietary restriction live on a daily basis.
Well, thank you very much, Allison, that your story is very inspiring. And as you have said, that we probably don't have a way to find a cure for food allergy yet. But like you said, with preparation and the management, that food allergy related accident is 100% preventable with proper policy and compassionate people. Again, thank you very much, Allison. Thank you.
Thank you.